Are you ready for another round? Good. Okay, so I have to say, this is new material for me. I never taught Rav Kook's Poetic Soul before, and I just so thoroughly enjoyed preparing it. It probably should be a few sessions, but we're going to jump in. Okay, so everyone should have the 3 sheets printed out and a pen and a full tank of energy. Give me a sign of life. We're good? Yeah? Okay. So we're going to talk about the poetic soul of Rav Kook. So I want to start with this. Last year, my wife encouraged me and I decided to go back to university after many, many years and get another degree. So I applied and got accepted to a university in Israel to do a master The first semester was really good. You know, we did.
You froze. You froze.
Okay, did I freeze?
You're back now.
Okay. So the first semester was really good. We did, you know, world love poetry and Shakespeare and Browning. It was beautiful. But the second semester, we did a very unusual thing. Every week, we did a live Zoom with a poet in America, esteemed poet who, every week, a different person, people, prize winners, heads of departments at universities, very esteemed poets. And it got worse and worse and worse for me. So to the end, I just left. I dropped out. I couldn't do it anymore. Why was that? Because the first poet that we had, who was like a world-class poet in America, she said again and again, there's no morality in art. In art, you should never censor anything. There's no morality in poetry. Just write whatever the creative spirit moves you, and there's no morality. And so she wrote and published poetry that was extremely negative about her husband and her children. And I kept thinking, no morality? No morality, really? Her mother begged her not to publish her poetry, and she said, of course I'm going to publish it. So that was hard for me. And then the second poet said, you know what I do in my poetry? I'm always on the lookout for very, very cute word plays. There's like a really adorable, cute word play. You know, I really write it down. And I'm thinking, word plays, poetry? And the third poet gave us a lot of advice on how to publish our poetry book. The tricks of the trade to get your book published in the poetry world. And I said, 3 strikes, I'm out. No morality, word plays, book of poetry. We're going to talk about Rav Kook now. We're going to enter a completely different world of poetry, okay? How did Rav Kook write? How did he write? So we mentioned this in past seminars, but Rav Kook would line his desk with pencils after midnight and just write stream of conscious. And they took his desk away, but people say we used to be able to go in and see him writing on the desk, see his writing on the desk. Because Rav Kook wrote, the pencil is not as fast as my thoughts. My thoughts come in waves. They just come in waves, unstoppable waves. He didn't think about word plays. He created words. He created the language that is part of Hebrew today. He never, and this I find unbelievable, he never rewrote. He never edited. He wrote in his diaries, and that was it. I mean, any of you who have published anything or written anything, how much work goes into editing, rewriting? He never edited, he never rewrote. He wrote in a gush, in a wave. You got to picture this now, just in almost a trance-like, channeling this. He was afraid that the thoughts would disappear. The paper, he wrote at one point, the paper comes to an end, but the thought does not end. So I want to jump into one poem, and then we're going to weave back and forth between his poetry and what is a poetic spirit. Because I really feel this is so sorely lacking in the Jewish landscape today. And we're having more and more poets, more and more real artists and poets, and it's come to life again. But for a couple thousand years, we had very few real Hebrew poets. And Rav Kook was a poetic spirit poet. He didn't, listen carefully, he did not write poetry. He was a poetic spirit. So I want to start actually with source number 8. Okay, it's on the last page. Source number 8. Put up a finger. Everybody have it? Anybody not have it? Okay, great. I'm going to read it in Hebrew. Ani malei ahava leElohim. Ani yodea shema she'ani mevakesh, ma she'ani ohev, einenu nikra b'shum shem. Ech yikare b'shem. Mashu yoter min hakol, yoter min hatov, yoter min hamahut, yoter min havaya. Ve'ani ohev. Ve'ani omer, ani ohev et ha'Elohim. That came out one day, one night for Rav Kook. So let's analyze this poem for a moment. Let's just analyze it. What comes up for you? What do you notice? And this is not a poetry class. Don't try and be deep or profound. No. Just what do you notice?
This is Sheila. I would say God. I mean, God is the central piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, but love seems to me that love, I mean, it's imbued with this passionate love for God. And it reminds me, last night I saw a movie I encourage people to take a look at. It's called The Professor and the Madman. And it's how the Oxford Dictionary was written, the first dictionary. And it's an incredible story. Sean Penn plays the madman. He was literally mad, and he murdered this woman's husband. And so by the end, this woman went through all kinds of shock, and then went through a transformation in her relationship with the murderer of her husband. And she wrote a note to him at the end, and it said, if love, ... then what?
Yeah. So Rav Kook, yeah, absolutely, Peter. So this is what Sheila talks about, God, and what Peter brings up, love. Beautiful. Anything else do you notice? Yeah, jump in.
Well, it seems very emotional to me that Rav Kook's heart was very full.
Beautiful. Very emotional, very passionate. Do you,
I just love that love and God are synonymous, that they both are not real, that you can't hold them and you can't really name them or describe them. They're interchangeable in this poem.
Beautiful. And does anyone notice how Rav Kook contradicted himself? Did you notice that? Rav Kook starts, I am full of love of God. I know that what I ask for, what I love in us is not called by any name. You can't call God by a name. And I say at the end, I love God. I know you can't put a name on something that's beyond everything. It's beyond cosmos. It's beyond, beyond, beyond. You cannot call it a name. And I'm calling it a name, and I love God. Rav Kook's poetry was part of the outlet for his contradictions. Usually we think of the rabbis having all the answers. They've got all the answers. Rav Kook had the contradictions. This is what I want to start us with. God, love, and contradiction. God, love, and contradiction. His poetry, he's inviting us into his soul with his poetry. That's what it is. This is a window into Rav Kook's soul. He wrote poetry through, I'm going to give you a little history now. He wrote poetry throughout his life. When he was 15 and 16 in yeshiva, his father sent him away to yeshiva, and he started writing poetry. And his father had a fit. I send you to yeshiva and you're writing poetry? I send you to yeshiva to learn. What are you writing poetry? So Rav Kook wrote back to his father when he was 17. And Rav Kook wrote back to him an epic poem, like 100-stanza poem in rhyme and meter, all about the laws of Hanukkah. Okay, you want me to learn? Okay, but I have to write poetry. So he wrote about this epic poem on the laws of Hanukkah. And Rav Kook started writing in 15, 16, and he wrote his whole life. He wrote his whole life. And his writing was very, very personal. Usually you see this, he says, I am full of love of God. So this is the first thing we have to notice. He doesn't talk, a person is full of love of God, someone is full of God. You should have love for God. Rav Kook wrote from the I, from the first person. This was him. And when I read it, I tremble with the vulnerability that Rav Kook expresses. So open, nothing, as we said, all in, not holding nothing back, right? Think of your rabbi wherever you live. Have you ever heard your rabbi wherever you live talk with unabandoned vulnerability? Just all in, all emotion, vulnerable. That's Rav Kook here, right?
I have a quick question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So I wonder if during Rav Kook's life, I mean, I understand you explained how he wrote this, and was any of this published while he was alive? I mean, I can't imagine my rabbi writing this and saying it out loud, but I can imagine him writing it. So I'm wondering whether, yeah.
These were all, the three we're seeing here, I think were all published in his lifetime. Right? But everything, these are poems, you could say, but really, even when Rav Kook wrote, whatever he wrote poetically. He used to say, there are laws in poetry and there's poetry in laws. And it wasn't like some things are poetic. Everything was poetic for Rav Kook. That's how he wrote. He wrote passionately. You saw the word love appear again and again and again. He wrote passionately. But he didn't write passionately about his wife, about his family. He had children. He didn't write poems about his wife, his family. He didn't write about what happened to him personally, okay? That's usually where the poet begins. He didn't write about the people that he was close with. He didn't write about his own the events of his life. He wrote from his soul, which is, he wrote really his love songs to God, the Jewish people, and that's the scope of his writing. I find that very unusual. And he wrote passion. Usually people write passionate love poetry when they're young. Rav Kook wrote passionate love poetry throughout his whole life. We've got till the end of his days, Rav Kook writing this poetry. It's like the love song that didn't stop. Okay, it didn't stop. It didn't abate. Okay.
Aryeh, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You talked
Go.
about the love and the contradiction, and one thing that comes up for me in Hebrew is how he uses Shem v'Hashem. Like Shem in Hebrew being name, but Hashem being Hashem. Can you say something about that? Like, was he trying to tell us something?
Interesting, right? He says, "Einenu nikra b'shum shem." It's not by any name, but actually, Helene, he doesn't use the name Hashem for God, which is the name. He uses Elohim. He uses actually a name for God, a name for God. So, but he would say this about any name, about Elohim, we have endless number of names for God in Hebrew, right? Avinu, Malkeinu, Ribbano Shel Olam, Borei Olam, Adonai, Kutchabrich. We have endless number of names for God. But then he says they're all names. You know, it's kind of saying it's just words. It's just words. It's way beyond words. It's so beyond words. But all I have is words. So I'm going to use words, right? I'm a living contradiction. It's way beyond words, but that's all I have. So I know what I write is incomplete. I cannot begin to touch what I feel and experience. I know that. And nevertheless, I cannot stop. Again, he wrote personally, we have great rabbis in our history, Rashi, Rambam, Ramban. We have great rabbis. We don't know anything about their personal lives. We don't know anything about their personal lives. And Rav Kook really brought us into his diaries, into his life. He writes from first person. We'll see this a lot. He writes from first person. And in fact, he wrote, I love this. He wrote, I talk a lot about myself. I cannot stop talking about myself. Really? I cannot stop talking about, because he had to express where he was. You know, and when Ayeka teaches educators, one of the hardest things we try and do for the educators is teach them to talk about themselves, share who you are. The more you share, that's the harmonic vibrations, share more, share deeply. Many of you are facilitators, share deeply. Contradictions, his poems are full of yearning, right? There's usually a sense of unfulfillment in his poems, in his poetry. And this was part of his life. He wrote in one place that yearning is the raw material, the raw matter for artists and poets. It starts with yearning. So if you have a yearning soul, then everything comes out like that. Everything comes out like that. What else can I tell you? He wrote poetry, and it was a source for him of his creativity, and it was even, I would say, a source of rebellion. It was even a source of rebellion to write, in a certain sense, a protest against the structure of society. Society can be very limiting by its structure. So I'm going to write poetry, which is in a certain sense will allow me the freedom to say what I want to say. Let's take a look at some more sources. Source number one. There was a figure in the beginning of the 20th century in Israel, Yosem Chaim Brenner, who was also a writer, and he led the secular parties in Israel, the secular movement. And he wrote about, and he writes here, he called Rav Kook a broken soul. So Rav Kook answers, and I love this answer. Rav Kook wrote, source number one, he who said of me that my soul is torn spoke well. We cannot describe in our minds a person whose soul is not torn. Only the inanimate is whole, but a human being is conflicted with contradicting desires and hopes, an internal war is always carrying on. Take another look. Take another look. Look at the brutal honesty of Rav Kook here. He's not trying to spin it. He's not an ambassador for Judaism or the ambassador for Israel or for the ambassador for all good things. He no spin. A human being is conflicted with contradicting desires and hopes. There's no attempt to sugarcoat anything. It's brutal. It's brutally honest. He lacks answers. He has unfulfilled dreams. Being at peace, being peaceful, sanguine, tranquil, harmony is in a certain sense the enemy of the poetic soul. Because the world is not at peace. As we said last time, the world is in motion. The world is moving. So we don't want to be fully embracing of everything. We want to feel the tension. And Rav Kook felt the tension between the what is and what could be. As we said last time, this world and the world that is coming. That's a tension I'm living in. I'm always about to blossom, about to blossom. No, an inner struggle. Okay? Let's look at source number 2. This is the poetic experience of Rav Kook.
Just want to say that the first quote really reminds me of what I was working on in your first session about how to be more hopeful. And a lot of it is to be able to live in the contradictions and to see my creativity come out of the contradictions. So I appreciate seeing that in his poetry as well.
A total validation shown of what you're feeling here. Absolutely. You know, I mean, I used to think like contradiction is wrong. It can't be X and not X at the same time. And Rav Kook says, yes, it can. Life is layered. Life is complicated, right? And especially when we come to things of belief and emunah, don't try and live, you know, a completely literal, non-contradictory life. It's complicated. My father passed away. My mother was devastated. For years, they'd been married for over 60 years. And it took me a few years to convey to my mother, you can be happy and sad at the same time. You can be happy and sad at the same time. And that's part of the contradiction of life. That's what we live. Look at source number 2. What's the poetic spirit, the poetic experience? Let's look at source number 2.
Arya, can I just say something that's really oppressing for me? That I'm not inviting pushback. I'm just challenged by it. It seems to me that the dialectic, or being able to hold two apparently opposite things at the same time, is the name of the game. And so, I mean, that's a way to win the game. And instead of trying to struggle with it, being able to allow them both to be. Now, specifically, as what you said before, that Rav Kook got into the struggle, you know, between what is and what could be. In my experience, having gone through my share, my no shortage of suffering and angst and all that stuff in my life, it seems at this point that I can find peace and if I want to write music or poetry, I can get in touch with the struggle, and I can also be peaceful. Am I as good an artist? No, maybe not, you know, but so what? Because I'd like it, the peace is worth it.
Okay. Look, Peter, we're all in different places. We all have different paths to walk. And I think for us right now, the question is, in our path, is there still something that we can learn from Rav Kook's experience? Is there something we can be, you know, the bottom line here, this is what I want here for us for the bottom line. And that is the harmonic vibrations to be exposed to the presence of a poetic soul. What can that do to us? What can that do to us? What can that evoke in us? That's really what I want us to get out of this session, to live in the presence of a poetic soul for a moment and see what that evokes in us. Let's take a look at source number 2. Says Rav Kook, as long as a person has to wait for times when the spirit of creation will descend upon oneself, and only then will one commence and initiate, introspect, meditate, and create, This is a sign that the light of one's soul has not yet appeared to him or her. The soul is always singing, daring, and joy are its clothes. Supreme pleasure embraces her. And a person needs to ascend to the pinnacle of one's own soul to be aware of its spiritual strides, to the fluttering of its most holy wings, and always be ready to listen to the mystical secrets of sacred conversation. I love that. Listen to the mystical secrets of sacred conversation. This is the inner music of the universe, we said. Then one will know that not just at random certain times is the soul renewing its wisdom and musings, its poetic ruminations and sacred discourse, but at all times and at every moment. Now listen, the soul washes over us with rivers of honey and butter. And the river that flows from it, after all, are sacred treasures, springs of wisdom and composing everything of good. Always, the soul is always singing. The soul washes over us with rivers of honey and butter. How sweet is that? This is a rabbi talking here. Rivers of honey and butter, fluttering to its most holy wings. This is a creative force. It's not like I'm waiting for the creative muse to touch me, get in the zone. Rav Kook says, your soul, you have a soul, and the soul is always talking, so it's always there. The soul is always singing. It's a force within us. Beethoven, toward the end of his life, when almost completely deaf, can you imagine the world's greatest composer, and he's deaf and he can't hear his own music? What torture that would be. And he wrote a letter to his brother, and he said, I want to die. I just want to die. I can't hear. What's the point of my life? I just want to die. But I can't, because there is still music within me that urges to come out. That was Rav Kook. There are still melodies within me that are urging to come out. The soul washes over us with honey, rivers of honey and butter. So that's the poetic experience, okay? Look at the next one. My creativity flows like a spring of water, abounding waves, always vibrant, unstoppable tributaries. The tide of my soul within me is always moving. My vision is full of holy light, continually expanding. My prayer comes from the source of my soul. It is great and full of God's strength. Again, my creativity flows like the spring of water. In Rav Kook's writings, and we've seen this a bit, Rav Kook did not know how to use a comma. And he practically didn't know how to use a period. Rav Kook just wrote and wrote and wrote. And you say, oh my God, is this ever going to end? Is this ever going to end? It's like one sentence and it's a whole page. But that was the force. That was the creative force that went on. And we saw that a little bit in the last session, where he said toward the end, he said, if you remember this, with the Olam Haba, he said, and the dew of life to revive the life of this world. And then he goes on to one of his rhapsodies, and old and young together will look upon it and flock to it, and kings and ministers and warriors and heroes. I mean, he goes into these rhapsodies that never end. It was this flowing. Let's go on.
Aryeh, can I ask a question, or do you just want to read
Yeah.
it? I don't want to be a nudnik, but
Go ahead,
what's
Shalane.
coming up for me, like there's this whole energy of Tov Miriam. Like I feel a lot of, and I'm talking yogi talk now, and I just need a clarification. There's a lot of yin energy in the way that he's presenting this.
I
In
don't
his
know.
creativity. I
don't know yin to know that, but it's a flowing, endless flow. It's a waterfall. Rav Kook was
Is there, without insulting him, this is why is there a feminine to it? Is it and maybe it's because I just became a grandma again, but it feels like there's this womb of Rav Kook and the flow, the energy, and I don't mean, I apologize, male people. I have nothing against your yang energy, but I don't know, it's just like, where is he getting all this feminine creativity?
Can I jump? I have to say, Helene, I felt something similar, but my interpretation is he's so incredibly in touch with what is happening inside him. And I think we tend to associate that in touchness with a female energy because we genetically change regularly. We transform, we shed, we come back. And I think to hear it from a male voice and a perspective, it's interesting to me that that's the way God presents God's self to Rav Kook as an internal creative energy, as if he was growing a bringing to birth a child. I love, I mean, that's what screamed at me. So
Beautiful. I'm a little speechless. I don't know as this male figure but Rav Kook was birthing all the time. That's certainly true. Rav Kook was always in a state, and we're going to see this. He was in a state of limitlessness. And let's look at let's jump ahead to source number 5. And you'll get a
Sorry,
taste of
Ari,
it.
before you get started, can I just comment on that? So maybe the previous session, this is Jeffrey speaking, the noise we were talking about. So maybe, and you addressed it as the internal noise. So maybe, this internal noise he was able to get rid of, and that's where he was able to, be more in touch with his inner soul and where this all came from. And maybe that is a deficiency of men, if we're going to generalize, that we're more prone to the noise. We certainly, men don't listen well. So maybe it's because, we can't distinguish noise from true sounds.
I think that's beautiful. I think that's beautiful. Wow, it's a whole new insight for me. Thank you very much. And you know what? We're gonna look at source number 4. I was gonna skip it, but I think there's something male and female about source number 4 in light of what you guys have said. So let's look at source number 4. This is in the style of poetry. He writes, aesthetic poetry does not ask for purpose, but emerges from the spirit of God that is in the soul of the poet. I think this is also not a female approach here. Male approach would more likely have a purpose, a goal, a solution, working towards something. And so for Rav Kook in source number 4, you see like I'm writing poetry, there's no purpose to this at all. It's not, and it's unknown, and I'm giving birth to something. I don't know where it's going. I'm not in control of it. And it's just happening. It's just going. Let's look at source number 5. It's a similar idea. In source number 5, Rav Kook writes, my thoughts are wide seas. In the language of prose, I cannot express them. Against my will, I am forced to be a poet, a free poet, mishorer chofshi. I cannot be confined to the stubbornness of meter or rhyme. I flee from simple prose because of its heaviness and limitation. You see, Rav Kook is giving us a protest movement here, even in poetry. No limitations, not rhyme, not meter, not prose. I don't want limitations. I'm giving birth as an openness. It's an openness. And that, nice people, brings us to our next poem. Maybe it's Rav Kook's most famous poem. I'll read it in Hebrew, follow it in English. It's source number 6. And underline underline with your pen, whatever you notice, okay? Merchavim, merchavim, merchavei el, ifta nafshi. Al tizgaruni b'shum kluv, lo gashmi v'lo ruchani. Shata hi nishmati barachavei shamayim. Lo yachiluha kirot lev, velo kirot maaseh, musar, hegion v'nimus. Mima'al lekol ele shata hi va'afa. Mima'al lekol asher yikare b'chol shem. Mimarom mikol oneg, mikol noam v'yofi. Mimarom lekol niskav v'ne'etzal. Cholat ahava ani. Tzamati, tzamati le'elokai. Take another look. What comes up for you? What do you notice? So jump in. Yeah, Leslie? You're on mute. You're on mute.
It's such an invitation to me. It's such permission to acknowledge what I mean. I can only go back to what Nancy called that shimmering, to acknowledge that sparkle, that shimmering inside this. He will not be confined. His soul won't be confined. There's just something so freeing and inviting and joyful to me. But it's stunning. It's really stunning.
Wow. Mircha, yeah, Nancy, jump in.
This is what it means to be fully alive, I believe. And the masculine and the feminine, sort of, there's no distinction. I mean, there's just a sense of complete sort of emerging of all that is. I mean, he is just saying, I mean, because any distinction goes away here. Because any distinction has limitation to it.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yes, Sharona. Or who's there? Jump in, Barbie. You haven't had a chance yet.
Yes, when he says this, I bring it to the context of how he's living his life and what we've studied before about the oneness of people that combine. He's opening up. There are no parameters. We are all above all of the details of our reality. We are much, much more than that. And this is saying in all of this.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Sharona, you wanted to add something?
Oh, I was just going to say, it reminds me of that feeling of wanting to be in the zone. You know, you want to just be able to get into that connection with God, that you feel God is working through you. And you know, I think that's both a male and female desire with creativity.
So let's, beautiful. I love what you said. Let's read it again one more time and take a look. Expanses, expanses. He says it twice. He says it twice. And merchavim, expanses, is a very common theme in Rav Kook. It's always we want to expand ourselves. We want to be in the process of expanding ourselves. For Rav Kook, Egypt, Mitzrayim, Meitzarim, the small, the narrow place, Egypt was not just a place. Egypt, to be put into a small world that I can be in any time. And the opposite of Egypt and Meitzarim, Mitzrayim, was Merchavim. I always want to be leaving Egypt. It's a paradigm. It didn't happen once in the leaving Egypt at Passover. It's a paradigm of life, of going to freedom. I always want to expand from myself. When we teach teachers, one of the first questions we ask teachers is, when you're teaching a subject a second and third time, 5th time you're teaching it. Do you teach it the same way? You've taught Sefer Breshit or Megillat Esther or Bar and Bat Mitzvah. You've taught. Are you teaching it the 2nd, 3rd way? Have you become a captive to your success? Have you become a slave to the way that you've done it? It worked the 1st time. Are you doing it the same way the 2nd time? If so, you've put yourself into a small place. Never teach it the same way the 2nd time. Don't make yourself a captive of your own success. Merchavim, merchavim. Then he says, divine expanses, my soul craves. Endless. Confine me not in cages. What are these cages Rav Kook is talking about? What are these cages? What's confining him? So it could be mortality, time and place. And if we really want to be a little bit revolutionary, we can say there's a hint here, actually, of halakha, of Jewish law, of the details. Rav Kook was a posek. He wrote books on Jewish law, but he said it was very, very hard for his soul to go down to details. It was hard for his soul to go down to details. He always had to see the bigger picture. And then he starts flying. My soul soars, right? Above, look at the word above in this, in the next paragraph. Above these, above all pleasure, above all that is, it's above, beyond merchavim. This was Rav Kook. There's a yearning here, and listen carefully. There's a word in Welsh that I was taught, hereth. It's one of the beautiful words. It means, in Welsh, it means the yearning for a home that you can never go back to. It's an unfulfilled yearning. It's a yearning for something that you can never have. That, the Welsh have a name for it. It's such a profound image. The yearning, and that's Rav Kook. He's yearning for something he will never have. Expanses, divine expanses, my soul craves. I'll never have it. That's the brokenness. In another place, Rav Kook said, Ani mekaneh b'Hashem, I'm jealous of God. That's a crazy statement. I'm jealous of God. But he wanted to have the full experience. I am lovesick, I thirst for God. And what hits me in this is, again, the vulnerability, the yearning, the hope, without limitation. Let's go on.
This sort of reminds me of when you've done an incredible meditation or you've walked in nature and that you are just one with yourself and the universe. It was like he was having a day of the sun is shining, the birds are singing. That's how I feel when I read this. The air is pure, it's clean. He had no people bothering him.
Marianne, yes. And that's how you feel when you experience that. Remember, Rav Kook was sitting in his dark room after midnight. Rav Kook was feeling this all the time. He was lovesick. I'm envious of him. What would I give to be lovesick? I get so enwrapped with myself. I love my wife. I should be lovesick all the time. But you know what? A lot of times I just think about the small stuff. I think about myself. I get lost in the little picture, the noise of my head. Rav Kook was living this lovesick world. And what does that bring? Look at source number 7. Look what that source does to him. Source number 7. Mi yodeh et omek tza'ari. Who knows the depth of my sorrow? Look what the love does to him. Peter, you talked about sorrow here. The attachment here gives him pain. Who will be able to imagine it? I am imprisoned in countless chains within untold border, and my spirit yearns for expansiveness, that word again. My soul thirsts for God. Rav Kook wrote a lot about pain. The yearning brings pain. The yearning that can never be fulfilled brings pain. For Rav Kook, he was living on the edge. That's where he was living. Oh, a glimpse. And now let's look at one more poem.
Can
Source
I,
number-
if I may, I'm sorry, I'm going back one, it's Jeffrey again, going back one
Good.
poem here. And you mentioned this yearning, the Welsh word, and this yearning for, to get back to something that you can never get to. To me, Olam Haba has that sense. You know, I think Iris Stone uses the term infinite horizon. In that it's always there, but it never is attainable. Recently heard a discussion about Mashiach and Maimonides' principles, and that the principle is that we believe in the coming of the Messiah. It's not so. If you believe in the coming of the Messiah, it means you don't believe the Messiah will actually come, because if the Messiah comes, you no longer are believing in the coming itself. So it's that always out there, always yearning. I'm sorry, I just had to.
I
put
love
that
it.
in there.
I love it. I love it. Beautiful. The yearning. The yearning. Helene wrote in the chat, and this connects to what Jeff just said. This yearning sounds like Moses. So Rav Kook wrote about Moses, about Moshe, said all of the Avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they bequeathed an eternal midah, quality, to the Jewish people. Avram gave us chesed, kindness. Yitzchak gave us gvura, self-control. Yaakov gave us tiferet, evenness, beauty. What did Moshe give the Jewish people? What quality, what eternal quality did Moshe give to the Jewish people? So Rav Kook said, think of Moshe leading the people out of Egypt, wandering for 40 years, carrying them, and dying on the verge of coming into the land. Rav Kook writes that Moshe Rabbeinu bequeathed to the Jewish people eternally the quality of yearning, which fits with what Jeffrey just said, the coming, the yearning, and to live with that image of we're not there yet, the world that is coming. And and it tears my soul because I want to be there, watching the flower, this hibiscus blossom, but I was watching it about to blossom. It's always, and this is REA 2.0. I so much want to see my better self, but and then there's 3.0, 4.0. It's this never-ending process, movement, journey. This is who we are. This is the Jewish song, the journey, the movement, the becoming. This is who we are, and this is what Cook lived, and this gives birth to the Jewish soul of poetry. Let's look at source number 9. It's very different. It's a different kind of song now. It's a different kind of poem. The Great Shofar. For those of you who came in late, we did number 8 already. We looked at number 8 in the beginning, and we're going to look at source number 9. Says Rav Kook, El Rosh Ahar Alei, Shofar Gadol Kach, Sa'im Necha Ure'ei, Anot Ha'am Hadach, Uveshofar Hagadol Taka, Tekiya Trua Ushvarim, Uvraglecha Raka, V'yirashu Hakvarim. V'hakolot Ya'alu Blulim Ad Shorshei HaNishamot. V'yitoru HaNirdamim Ninei Ha'ariyot. Hamisachkim B'zramim V'shogim B'havayot. V'yakitzu Hayishenim B'tardemat HaGolah. V'ya'uru Hazonim Ba'alei Ha'ozen Ha'orlah. V'yakumu Ya'alu La'aretz Shaharim Karva Machu. V'yasimu Kates V'keratz L'galut Shaba Hudachu. This one is in rhyme, actually, in meter and rhyme. It's pretty amazing to write a poem like this in one shot without any editing. But it's a different kind of poem. Take another look and see what comes up for you here. What's he doing here?
Is he looking toward the end of time?
Yeah, completely. Shofar Hagadol. Tekaba Shofar Hagadol, not the shofar that we have on Rosh Hashanah, the Shofar Hagadol that the Mashiach will blow. to gather in everybody. What else? What do you notice, Nancy?
He is not talking about himself here. He is projecting outward in a different way than he has in the first ones we've read. Incredible hopefulness here.
I don't know if this is, as Nancy said, a projection. I think for Rav Kook, wait, you're on mute, Nancy.
I don't mean projection in the way I think you've thought. I mean, he's sort of creating this vision that every one of us can walk into. That's very hopeful. And
I think for Rav Kook, this was a reality. This was a reality that just had not happened. But this for Rav Kook was for Rav Kook, this was as real as today. Because this is where it has to go. Because the whole world has to come to this point, to fruition. Because the world, the flower has to blossom. That's why there was no point of the flower if it not to blossom, and all of its life was to blossom. And it was emerging. And so of course it will, I may not live to see it blossoming, but of course it had to come out sometime. Of course it had. Pam asks, what year did he write this? I don't know. That's a great question. I'll have to check and see. I'll do a little homework for you and see if we can find out even what year he wrote it. But he passed away in 1935. So it was probably post World War I till probably in the 1920s. And, but it was a reality for Rav Kook. This had to happen. Because what was the point of reality if not to completely go from latent to full, to emerge, lehishtalem, to become complete? This is how the world had to come. This is the whole idea of tshuva, of coming back to the source and coming back to the oneness. Who knows how long? Who knows if we'll see it? But for Rav Kook, it was a reality that did not just yet exist. It was a reality in our imagination. Yeah, jump in there, a few hands. Peter, yeah.
Yeah, I am really, really struck by the last two lines, and particularly that phrase, and wink at the dispersing in which they were scattered. That's an incredible use of language. I mean, it just, on one hand, is just so out of context in what he's saying, and yet it's not. Is that, and so the interesting question is that a wink like, hey guys, this has just been a joke, God's joke on us, and we're just coming back, all this diaspora and dispersion and everything else. So, you know, that's just the nature of life. We live, we die, we suffer. We're all coming home. So like, chill out. Or is there some kind of knowing wink, you know, that yes, we're finally coming home. But it's, I don't know what I'll be interested in your take on it, or other people's take on it.
It could be all of those. That word really hit me too. Like that struck me a little out of what was going on. It was so majestic. And then, you know, wink, maybe what we say in Sharamolot, Az Hayinu Kecholmim, and then we were as dreamers. It'll happen as you wake up from a dream. It'll just happen in a moment, in a wink of an eye.
There's a saying that God is a comedian with an audience that's too scared to laugh. So I don't know if that's what.
I don't know. Some hands went up there. People wanted to jump in. Who's there? Barbara, jump in.
Yeah, this to me is a whole poem about faith. And he caps it off at the very end by saying, you see, don't lose faith. This is all, you know, this is all true. We were never going to get totally lost here. We would come above it. Our hope would survive.
Look at that. We're putting together last session and this session, the hope,
Yeah.
the vision. Yeah, Bonnie, jump in.
On the same vein, this reminded me of something that I think was Jeff said in our breakout group, which was this about action. like we can overcome obstacles to having that kind of faith and that kind of hope and optimism by doing something. And I hear that in this poem somehow.
Beautiful, beautiful. We'll come back to that, Bonnie. I want to comment. Yeah, Mary Ann, jump in.
My focus also is the sleeping ones will wake up in the coma of the despair. And also, even the heretics, it's like, almost to me, I'm reading in, and I could be reading it in, that there's already a destiny prepared for us. If whether we're sleeping, we're awake, whether we're negative, we still interact within ourselves or the brain, whatever's going on there. But you're going to get to see maybe the pearly gates or the place it was meant to be, even if we had free will and we've been destroying it. Everyone will get a piece of this action.
Yeah. Look again at the third line and lift up your eyes and see, right? Remember he talked about above, beyond, me'al, beyond. I want to be beyond. Lift up your eyes and see. Don't get caught up in the moment too much. Go see it from the balcony. See it from the stars. See it from the heavens. See what's going on. Get it. Lift up your eyes. Lift yourself up and see. There's something cataclysmic happening. And to come back to what Bonnie said about, and Jeff, the action, etc. Rav Kook talks a lot. We've seen it about the soul is always singing. The soul is always singing. But the soul, listen carefully, the soul is singing in response to the universe calling. Really, the universe, the soul of the universe is calling us. And that's what Rav Kook is saying here. Those with a deaf ear will arise and come to Eretz Yisrael. We're being called. There's a calling. The end of days, God, our future is calling to us. And that's what my soul is singing about. My soul is trying to make harmony with being called by the end of the day. This is the melody in the universe, right? And this is the Tekah Shofar Gadol, the Cherutenu. This is when we talk about the shofar, what is the shofar, right? You blow in the shofar, you blow into the shofar to wake us up. And it's compared on Rosh Hashanah to when Rosh Hashanah was the sixth day of creation, God blowing the soul into the human being. God blows soul into the human being, right? Nishmat Chaim Ba'pal, right? Into the soul of the human being. God blows the neshama into the human being. And when we blow the shofar, we are again recreating ourselves. And when we blow the shofar Hagadol, the great shofar, we're getting to the deepest place of ourselves, the collective deepest place of ourselves, and we're waking up our souls. Our souls are there, but they're sleeping a little bit. We're sleepwalking through life. Rav Kook is saying, wake, 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 blast the great shofar, over shofar hagadol taka, right? And then everybody will wake up. Everybody will wake up, the dormant ones, the graves, the sleeping ones, everyone, even the heretics, everybody will arise. We're being called. We're being called. Wake up. And this was also part of Rav Kook's poetry. He was living in the vision of the future. He was living, and how can you not be hopeful? Read this poem. How can you not be hopeful and optimistic? Rav Kook says, it's like, the race hasn't started. And he says, your horse is going to come in. It's coming in, like it's going to happen. Here, you may not see, your kids will see, your grandkids, you're going to see it. It's going to happen. Isn't that amazing? Give birth to your grandkids and their grandkids, and they will see it, and you're part of that. It's going to happen. How can you not be optimistic and hopeful? So this, what I wanted us to get was, it all flows together. Rav Kook, the optimism, the hope, the inner symphony, the being called. How can that not make us a poetic spirit, full of this yearning, full of the tornness of what could be and what is. All of this is like bubbling in us. And this is part of the Jewish soul. We are not a peaceful group of people. Sorry. Sandra's always said to me, we've been on a journey since our first date. And she said to me, like, you know, what, after being married over 30 years, she said to me, when I said something, she said, another change, another change, can't we just kind of like for a while, I mean, can't we just, you know, like, you know, and we're not a peaceful people, which is what, in parentheses, what makes Shabbat so beautiful. Because Shabbat, what do we call Shabbat? We call Shabbat Me'ein Olam Haba, a taste of the world that is coming. That's what we call it, Me'ein Olam Haba. Because on Shabbat, we play a game that Hashem has started. Hashem created this amazing game for us to play. On Shabbat, we imagine that we're there. There's nothing more to create. There's nothing more to do. I can take a nap and not in the mid. I can take a nap in the middle of the day and not feel guilty. Because there's no tornness anymore. There's nothing more to do. No more creating to do. Shabbat is in my opinion, is the soul restoring need that the 20th and 21st century desperately needs. For my self-care, for my well-being, my soulful well-being. Shabbat gives me a break from this yearning and tornness and evoking. I can just linger and just be on Shabbat, just be. No becoming on Shabbat, 6 days becoming. And we are becoming on steroids. Shabbat, just be. Me'ein olam haba. Okay? Nice people, we're not going to do breakout rooms. There was too much to talk about, but I want to do a drop of writing. Everyone take out a pen, please. And I'm just going to ask you 2 questions to reflect on. Okay? And since Rav Kook didn't like borders, I'm going to leave it very open. Okay? So the first question is, what does Rav Kook's poetic spirit and poetry evoke in you? What is this personality that talked so vulnerably and openly and daringly and poetically? What is that? What is that? Harmonic vibrations, what does that evoke in you? And the second question, similar to the first, but maybe a little different. What do you think you can learn from his example? What can you take away? What can you learn for your life? I mean, none of us are Rav Kook and not close, but what can you learn from being around this person? What can you learn? And we're not going to do breakout rooms. There'll be one big breakout room. But I want to invite anyone who hasn't had a chance to talk yet. Anything come up for you? Anything to share? I want everyone to feel welcome to open. Okay, so let's open up to everyone then. Anything you take away? Anything Rav Kook has led you to anything in our last hour? What does it evoke in you? What can you learn from it?
I think what keeps coming back to me is this idea of Olam Haba. I just really love that idea. And it just gives me, is coming rather than is out there, or it's coming all the time. Just something to explore. It's like it really turns that whole idea upside down. I've been in a bunch of Talmud classes, and the idea of people living through all this suffering because they're going to get their reward in Olam Haba always jars my brain. It doesn't work for me. And the idea that there's a different way to look at it is really fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you. An inner world waiting to come out, waiting to blossom. Beautiful. Thank you, Bonnie. Anyone else? Any insight of
Well,
what Rav Kook evoked in you and yes,
Just-
Sharona?
it just reminds me what you said, Bonnie, of the Chinese proverb of don't push the river, it flows by itself. And just the reminder that things are going to happen as they're going to happen, and that whole becoming, just let it become, and we don't have to have the answer. Just but there's a Jewish take to it of meeting those challenges, greeting those challenges, embracing them.
Beautiful. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, Bonnie, jump in. Unmute yourself.
I find it very reassuring. I have great respect for Rav Kook. I've always felt he was one of my teachers. And, you know, even though there's a lot of Sturm und Drang, you know, nevertheless, I'm assured of the ending. I like that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Peter and then Leslie, jump in.
Yeah, I have a curious response to it, as having read other I'd call this ecstatic poetry, is that my ego was saying, oh man, you can't do that. What's wrong with you? How come you can't be like Rav Kook? You know, it's like judging myself. Have you given up on life? You know, you know, I'm guilty, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. And then the other part, certainly at this point in my life, to say, voices, hey, it's okay not to struggle. It's okay you did that. And just, yes, it's ecstatic. And there are those people like Rav Kook that are wonderful to read. And then it's okay to do the laundry, you know? You know what I'm saying? So it's that, but I struggle with that, you know, why can't I be like Rav Kook? Hey, Joe, you're not Rav Kook. Like,
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Leslie?
I want to sort of go back to this expanses, this love sickness, which there's something to me about the expression, his need, his absolute need to express into reality this love sickness, this spirituality, this creativity, this yearning, that his expressiveness is the place he puts his yearning. It gives it, it's like it gives it, it becomes a vehicle for words he doesn't have, feelings that can't be seen. It actually just now struck me. It makes me wonder whether feelings of love sickness that I personally have had, thinking they were about another physical, material human being, were actually about God. It makes me wonder whether about that. So there's something about the soul being let free in the language of expression and the language of spirituality, that even if you don't arrive at the world that is coming, that is becoming, you're on a path. There's an engine and you're going somewhere. And there's something, that feeling has to have a place to live. It needs a makom, it needs a home to move it along. So there's something about how he uses the poetry and what it allows him to evoke, to express, that that intrigues me and attracts me.
Thank you. Barbara, jump in.
Yes, thank you. And I do mean thank you. This is this part of Rob Kook, the poetry, just fills my heart and soul. And what I yearn to do right now is just take this into my sunroom and sit down with Rav Kook for a while and read this over again and sort of have a conversation with him, because there's so many levels and complexities and nuances in the whole thing. It's almost breathtaking. So thank you so very much.
Barbara, I'm going to let you have the last word. That was beautiful. And that was really something that I pray, give a blessing to all of us, really to have a soulful conversation with Rav Kook. It's amazing how someone can write something to be so alive, so alive. For me, my takeaway is really to live with more yearning, with more love, with more abandonment, and try and let myself free myself of some of the cages and some of the smallness that I put myself in, and just try and soar to a place that God wants me to be, and listen. It's powerful to be around such a soul as Rav Kook. And again, he never published it. He didn't make any money off it. He didn't get any fame for it. This was really the call of his soul. Nice people. What a pleasure to spend time with you and Rav Kook together. Thank you for choosing to be a part of this event. Thank you very much. And what a great privilege we have to be together to do this. So we're starting a new series on next Tuesday, a week from this Tuesday, for anybody who's interested. Self-improvement. There'll be a few Rav Kook bombshells as usual. And be in touch with any thoughts or further questions, comments that come to you as you go to your sunroom and continue the conversation. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank
Ryan.
you. Toda rabah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And,
Throat.
Thank you.